The first thing Zara noticed when she stepped off the elevator into the lobby of the Shin Tower was that her reflection in the polished marble floors looked like a stranger. She had not meant to look. She never meant to look anymore. But the morning sun was cutting at a particular angle through the revolving glass doors, and the light caught her face wrong, caught the swelling along her left cheekbone at precisely the moment she passed the building directory, and she stopped walking without deciding to stop. The bruise had darkened overnight. What had been tender and pink the evening before had deepened into something unmistakable, deep violet at the center, bleeding into a sickly yellow at the edges. No amount of the concealer she'd applied in the dim bathroom mirror of Marcus's apartment. Marcus's apartment, a detail she needed to stop calling it his and start calling it what it actually was. A place she had been foolish enough to sleep in. No amount of product covered what 4 months of escalation looked like when it finally graduated to this. She adjusted the strap of her bag and kept walking. The job had come through an agency 2 months ago. Private household childcare. Family of 2, 1 employer, 1 child. The listing had been sparse on details. They always were at this level. But the compensation had been extraordinary. Zara had been in Seoul for 11 months without finding anything that used the full weight of what she was trained for. She had a degree in child development from Howard University and 5 years working with high-needs children in Atlanta before her life had taken the series of turns that had deposited her here, starting over in a country where she had to construct every morning from scratch. The interview had been at the Shin Tower. She had sat across a desk from a quiet, precise man in a dark suit who had asked her 23 questions in 50 minutes and thanked her at the end without smiling. She had been hired 2 days later via a message from his assistant. His name was Seo Junwoo. She had learned it from his business card, not from any introduction he made himself. He ran something, the nature of which she had been deliberately vague about researching, the same way you did not press your finger directly onto a bruise to find out whether it still hurt. The apartment occupied the entire 14th floor. His daughter's name was Hana, and Hana was 4 years old and had the precise, solemn attention of a child who had been raised in rooms where adults chose their words carefully. Zara had loved her instantly, which was the most dangerous thing that had happened to her in Seoul. She pushed through the revolving door now and stepped into the morning. The city was already running its full speed. The Seoul at 7:15 in the morning was not a city that eased into itself. It arrived fully formed, dense with sound and motion, and the particular energy of millions of people with somewhere specific to be. Zara moved with it, head down, bag close, the way she had learned to move in the 2 months since Marcus had made clear that her attempts to leave would be answered with an escalating vocabulary. She had made it 4 blocks from his building before she heard him behind her. "Zara!" Not a shout. And that was the thing about Marcus. He had never needed to shout. His voice was the particular register of a man who had learned that calm carried further than volume, and who had weaponized that knowledge down to a science. She did not stop walking. "Zara, I'm not going to chase you down the street. That's embarrassing for both of us." She turned at the next corner and walked faster, and heard his footsteps change pace behind her. The city moved around her, indifferent. A delivery cyclist threaded between her and a woman walking a small dog. A food cart vendor was lifting his metal shutters with a long grinding sound. No one looked at her. No one was going to look at her because this was a Tuesday morning and everyone was somewhere else in their own heads. She was 3 blocks from the Shin Tower when the black car pulled level with her. She registered it in her peripheral vision as a vehicle driving too slowly for the traffic around it. And then the rear door opened from the inside, and a man stepped out directly into her path, and she stopped hard, bag swinging forward on her shoulder, her whole body tensing. He was tall, Korean, perhaps mid-40s, in a dark suit that had no wrinkles in it, despite the early hour, which was the kind of thing you noticed about a person when your brain was processing threat level and cataloging details simultaneously. His face was composed in the way that very controlled people's faces were composed. Not blank, not cold, but organized. He looked at her. His eyes went immediately and without any pretense to the bruise on her cheekbone. They stayed there. "Who did that to your face?" and he said. The question landed with no preamble. No excuse, me, or are you all right, or the careful diplomatic throat clearing that people use when they wanted to acknowledge a thing without fully committing to it. Just the direct, fully unvarnished question delivered in a voice that was perfectly level. Zara opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She was standing on a public sidewalk in Seoul at 7:15 in the morning, with her employer looking at the bruise on her face, and her lungs had apparently forgotten their primary function. Zara, Marcus's voice. Close. She felt the air shift before she turned. Her body had cataloged the specific approach of his footsteps before her conscious mind processed them. In a reflex she had developed over 4 months of learning to read the room before the room announced itself. He stopped 6 feet back. He looked at Seo Junwoo with the expression Zara knew well, the quick private calculation of a man assessing how much of a problem he was dealing with. He took in the suit, the car, the driver behind the wheel who had not moved. Marcus decided it was manageable. Hey, he addressed Junwoo directly, voice sliding into its friendliest register. Sorry for the scene. She's my girlfriend. We had a disagreement this morning. Private thing. He glanced at Zara, that glance that was its own complete language, every word of which she knew by heart, and then back at Junwoo. If you could give us a minute, man, I'd appreciate it. Seo Junwoo turned toward Marcus. He did it the way he seemed to do everything, with deliberate, unhurried attention, as if turning to look at someone was a decision he had made fully and intended to complete fully. So he looked at Marcus's face, then at his hands, then at his face again. No, Junwoo said. Marcus's jaw pushed forward. Excuse me? She works for me, Junwoo said. She is already late. Her face was not like that yesterday. Marcus laughed, a short disbelieving sound. The laugh of a man who had decided the person in front of him hadn't fully understood the situation. I don't know who you are, but this doesn't concern you. I know who you are, Junwoo said. The laugh stopped. Junwoo took one step toward Marcus, a single step. His hands went into his trouser pockets. His expression did not change by any measurable degree. He looked at Marcus with the specific stillness of a man who had never in his professional life needed to raise his voice to make something land exactly where he intended it. If you touch her again, Junwoo said quietly, you will lose the ability to. The delivery rider near the corner had gone completely still, where the woman walking the small dog had slowed without appearing to slow. The building's security guard across the street had turned his head without moving any other part of his body. Marcus stood very still. Something moved behind his eyes. A recalculation, fast and private. His pride was a loud thing. She had lived with it long enough to know its exact volume. But underneath the pride, something older and more honest was sending a signal upward that his pride could not completely override. Or the signal said, this man means every single word. Marcus straightened. He looked at Zara one final time. She was looking at the building entrance beyond Junwoo's shoulder. He turned and walked away without looking back. The interior of the car was the quietest place Zara had been in months. Dark leather, a privacy partition between them and the driver. The noise of Seoul outside the windows dropped to something distant and irrelevant the moment the door closed. Like a sound mix someone had dialed down. Junwoo sat on his side of the seat with a full, deliberate distance between them and looked out his window at the city. Zara sat with her bag in her lap and her hands folded over it and her eyes on her own window. She pressed 2 fingers carefully to her cheekbone, and the pain came back sharp and specific, and she lowered her hand. Left panel, Junwoo said, without looking away from his window. First aid kit. She found it. Small, navy blue. Oh, she snapped the chemical ice pack and pressed it to her face and breathed out through her nose. Slow. Even. From the corner of her vision, she saw him glance at her. Once, brief, and then look back out his window. The building arrived. The driver pulled around to the private side entrance. Junwoo stepped out and held the door. Not with ceremony, not with the performance of consideration. Just the practical motion of a man whose hand was on the door and who held it because she was walking through it. She stepped out with the ice pack against her face and her bag back on her shoulder. Thank you, she said, for what happened back there. He looked at her with the directness she was already learning was simply how his face worked. Does he know where you live? She thought about lying. She was not sure why. Habit, maybe. The habit of minimizing. Who? Yes. He nodded once and turned toward the entrance. In the elevator, they stood side by side without speaking. Zara watched the floor numbers climb. She was acutely aware of him beside her. Not the way you were aware of a threat, but the way you noticed the absence of something you'd been carrying so long you forgot it wasn't supposed to be there. His breathing had no tension in it, no signal embedded in the rhythm warning her to read the room. She noticed this the way you noticed when a fire alarm stops. The doors opened on 14. Hannah was in the hallway, yellow dress with small white flowers, dark hair sticking up on the left side from sleep. Both arms already extended before the elevator was fully open. Her whole small body leaning forward with the impatience of a child who had been waiting since the moment she woke up. When Zara stepped out and bent down, and the child hit her with the full committed force of someone who had been waiting and was done waiting. She pressed her face into Hannah's hair and held on. The child smelled like sleep and baby wash, and something underneath that was entirely and specifically her own particular warmth. A warmth Zara had learned to recognize over 8 weeks, and that did something precise and dangerous to her chest every single time. "You're late," Hannah announced into Zara's shoulder. "I know, baby. I'm sorry." Hannah leaned back and looked at Zara's face with the direct, completely unself-conscious attention that small children had not yet been taught to manage. Her dark eyes moved to the swollen cheek. Her brow drew together in a way that looked too old for her face. "You have an OE," she said. "I bumped it," Zara said. "It's okay." Hannah held the assessment for one more second, measuring, unconvinced, and then turned to her father who stood just behind Zara. "Appa." The grave seriousness of someone filing an official report. "Zara has an OE on her face." "I see it," Junwoo said. Something opened in his face that no other context appeared to produce. Something completely unguarded and soft in a way that his face was not soft in any other room. "Go get dressed. Mrs. Cho made breakfast." Hannah grabbed Zara's hand. "Come with me." "Let Zara put her bag down first," Junwoo said. Hannah released the hand with a sigh of profound theatrical suffering and disappeared down the hallway. Zara went to the staff room near the kitchen, set her bag down, stood in front of the small mirror. The swelling had climbed toward her eye overnight. She applied the arnica gel from her own bag, covered what she could, held her own gaze in the mirror for 3 full seconds, and went back out. Junwoo was at the coffee machine. He set a cup on the counter near her side of the kitchen without a word. Then he turned and looked at her with the same complete attention he'd given her on the pavement. "Starting tomorrow," he said, "Sungmin collects you at 7 o'clock. "That's really not." 7 o'clock, he said, with the same tone and no additional explanation. She read his face. The conversation had concluded on his side before it had begun on hers. "Okay," she said. He picked up his own cup and moved toward his study. At the doorway, he stopped without turning around. "The ice pack," he said. 20 minutes tonight." The door closed. Zara stood in the kitchen with both hands wrapped around her coffee and looked at the closed door and felt something settle in her chest that she was absolutely not going to examine right now. Down the hallway, Hannah's voice floated back toward her. "Zara, the fish are hungry." She set down her cup and went to find her daughter. The thought arrived so naturally that she stopped walking. Zara, her daughter. She pressed the thought back down, carefully, the way you pressed a loose thread back into fabric and hoped it held. She pressed it down and went to find Hannah and the fish. 3 weeks into the new routine, Zara was organizing Hannah's books on the low shelf when Junwoo came out of his study and stopped in the middle of the living room. "Sit for a moment," he said. She sat at the far end of the sofa. He sat in the chair across from her. Not close, the precise distance of a man who understood that closeness had to be constructed in increments. He set his glass on the low table between them. "Your family," he said. "Are they in Seoul?" "Atlanta," she said. "My mother, my older brother." She paused. "We talk when we can." "Do you have people here?" She thought about it honestly. There was a woman from her Korean language class in the first months. They had lost touch. There was the neighbor on her floor who left fruit in the hallway at the holidays. She thought about Marcus and what she had confused for a social life for 4 months and felt something cold move through her. "Not really," she said. I've been fairly isolated since I arrived. He absorbed this the way he seemed to absorb everything, quietly with precision, without filling the space with reassurance. He set his glass down. Sungmin is available to you during the day, he said. Not only for the morning collection, if you need to go anywhere. She looked up. I'm not in danger, she said. He's not going to. He will, Junwoo said. His voice was completely matter-of-fact. Men like that always return. When he does, Sungmin will be close. She held his gaze and found no argument that was honest, because he was right and she knew he was right. And arguing against something true was a habit she was trying to break. Okay, she said. He reached for his glass. The movement pushed his sleeve back slightly, and she saw it. A thin silver scar on his left wrist. Old, barely there, catching the lamplight for 1 second before his sleeve shifted back. He did not adjust it. He did not hide it. The park Saturday, he said. The three of us. Hana has been asking. She mentioned it to me 5 times today, Zara said. She mentioned it to me 4 times, he said. He looked at his glass. Cut using different approaches each time. The corner of his mouth moved by the smallest controlled degree. She is thorough. Zara pressed her lips together to keep the smile contained. He saw it. He looked back at his glass and said nothing, but the corner of his mouth had not fully recovered. She collected her jacket and moved to the elevator. At the door she turned, because she felt his eyes on her back, and she had learned to trust that feeling. And she was right. He was standing in the middle of the room with both hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression she had begun to notice he wore sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. Something between recognition and confusion. The look of a man standing in front of a door he cannot explain the existence of. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed between them. She let out the breath she'd been holding and looked at the ceiling and thought, this is the most dangerous situation you have ever been in, and meant something entirely different than she would have meant 3 weeks ago. Marcus came back on a Wednesday. He was smarter than he'd been the first time. He understood now that the building had something he could not simply wait out. So he found her at the small pharmacy 2 streets over where she'd stopped on her lunch break to pick up vitamins Hana had run out of. And he appeared at her shoulder in the narrow aisle between the supplements and the cold remedies like he'd been there all along. You have me blocked, he said. His voice was pleasant. The pleasantness was the most familiar and the most dangerous thing about him. And he was staring at the shelf in front of them as though they were 2 strangers studying the same product. Every number, every platform. Yes, she said. She took the vitamins from the shelf. That's childish. She moved toward the counter. He moved with her. I just want to talk, he said. You embarrassed me, Zara. In front of that man. You let him speak to me like that. I need you to leave me alone, she said. His hand closed around her wrist, not violently. That was never how it started. Just firm. Just the grip of a man communicating that she was not going anywhere until he decided she was. The pharmacy cashier was looking at her phone. The door opened. Sungmin walked in. Marcus released her wrist before Sungmin was close enough to have seen the grip. He stepped back. He smiled. Think very carefully, he said quietly just to her, about what you're doing, and walked out. Sungmin stopped beside her. He looked at her wrist. He looked at the door. He touched you? My wrist. He grabbed it. Sungmin took out his phone. Mr. Seo will want to know. She did not argue. She paid for the vitamins and went back to the car and sat in the back seat with her wrist in her lap and thought about the fact that she had not cried yet, not once in 4 months, and that the absence of tears did not mean she was fine. It meant she had been fining for so long she had forgotten what the alternative felt like. That same evening, after Hana was asleep, Junwoo was in his car. He had Marcus's workplace information from the background file Sungmin had compiled 3 weeks prior. He had known the name of the firm. He had known its address in Uedo. He had known for 2 weeks that the firm's parent company was a subsidiary of a holding group. He had known for 10 days that he owned 34% of that holding group. He had not used this information until tonight. He arrived at the building at 8:30. Marcus was still at his desk on the 8th floor when the receptionist, who had been contacted ahead by someone from Junwoo's office, showed him to the small conference room near the stairwell. Marcus walked in expecting a client meeting. He saw Seo Junwoo sitting at the head of the conference table with a single folder in front of him and his hands folded on top of it. As in the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere, he was always going to arrive and is simply waiting for the other person to catch up. Marcus stopped. He looked at the room. He looked at the door that had just been closed quietly from the outside. He sat down at the opposite end of the table. "You're the man from the street," Marcus said carefully. "My name is Seo Junwoo." He opened the folder in front of him and turned it so Marcus could read the top document. "I hold 34% of Daesung Holdings. Daesung Holdings is the parent company of Corelink Pacific Group. Corelink Pacific Group is the parent company of the firm you have been employed by for the past 18 months. Marcus looked at the document, then at Junwoo's face, then back at the document. The color left his face in stages, starting at the edges, the way something expensive breaks incrementally, each stage worse than the one before. "Sure, every salary deposit you have received for 18 months, Junwoo said, in the same even tone he had used for every other sentence, came from a payroll system that exists within my ownership structure. The contract you signed on your first day contains a standard conduct clause. My legal team reviewed it this afternoon." He paused. "You are in breach." Marcus said nothing. His jaw was working. "Your access card will be deactivated at midnight," Junwoo said. "A termination letter will be processed tomorrow morning. You will not be eligible for a reference." He closed the folder. "Your work authorization renewal, which I understand is due in 8 weeks, has encountered a complication at the processing stage." "You can't—" "I already have," Junwoo said. He stood. He picked up the folder. He looked at Marcus from the end of the table with the expression of a man who has completed a task and found it unsatisfying but sufficient. "Why, she told you to leave her alone," he said. "You put your hand on her wrist today anyway." He held the look for 2 seconds. "If you contact her again, in any form, the legal file my team has assembled goes to the prosecutor's office. Medical records, photographs, a statement from a previous partner who filed a protection order in Chicago 4 years ago." Marcus's mouth opened. "She deserves better than what you gave her," Junwoo said. And you are about to receive exactly what you gave." He walked to the door, opened it, and left. Marcus disappeared from her life with the completeness of a man who had run his calculation and arrived at a result he couldn't argue with. Zara noticed his absence the way you noticed when a sound you'd stopped hearing had actually been present the whole time, in its removal, suddenly understanding how much space it had been taking up. She did not ask what had happened. She looked at Junwoo one morning across the kitchen counter, and he looked back at her, and she understood that the question had already been answered, and the answer was thorough and final. "Thank you," she said quietly. He set her coffee on the counter in front of her. 7 o'clock tomorrow. Sungmin will be outside." That was all. She picked up her coffee and went to find Hana. The necklace became a question on a Wednesday morning. Junwoo was at the coffee machine. The same routine every morning. The same position. But this morning he did not take his cup to his study. He stood at the counter and looked out the kitchen window at the city below, and Zara continued slicing the apple Hana had requested in exact triangles, and the kitchen held both of them in the ordinary morning quiet. "Hana was asking me something last night," he said, without turning around. Zara's knife continued moving. "About your necklace. Or she wanted to know why you wear it every day." The knife slowed by half a second. She kept her eyes on the cutting board. "What did you tell her?" "That some things matter enough to keep close." He turned. He leaned back against the counter with his coffee in both hands and looked at her across the kitchen. His eyes went to the pendant at her throat, directly, openly, without the pretense of looking at something else. "What is it?" "A crescent," she said. She looked down at it briefly. "I found it at a market years ago. Cape Town, actually, when I was traveling." "Which market?" he asked. She looked up at him. His face was composed and completely still. "One of the outdoor ones near the waterfront. I don't remember exactly." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once and picked up his coffee and walked to his study. The door closed. Zara stood at the cutting board with the knife in her hand and did not move for 4 full seconds. She lifted the pendant with her free hand and turned it over. The engraving on the back was small and precise. 2 letters intertwined, cut into the gold with something very fine. Impossible to read unless you were close or you already knew it was there. She placed it back against her collarbone and went back to the apple. In his study, Seo Junwoo sat down at his desk and placed his coffee to the side and did not open a single document. He had commissioned a necklace once, 11 years ago. A jeweler in Insadong who worked only on private commissions, who had taken the sketch from Junwoo's own hand and studied it for a long time before agreeing. The crescent shape had been specific. The curve, the angle, the weight distribution, the chain connecting at the upper point rather than the lower, which was unusual and had been Junwoo's specific request. The engraving on the back had been 2 letters intertwined, cut into the gold by hand under magnification. He had watched. One, he picked up his phone and sent Sungmin a message. Find the jeweler in Insadong who does private commissions. The one I used 11 years ago. I need to speak with him. He set the phone down and picked up the documents in front of him and made himself read. Saturday came with clear skies and the particular mild air of a Seoul autumn morning that felt like the city was briefly being generous. Hana was at the front door in her yellow coat 25 minutes before they were supposed to leave, her snack bag gripped in both hands with the focused energy of someone who had been preparing for this operation since Thursday. They walked to the park, Hana between them, narrating everything. A man doing Tai Chi near the entrance who she assessed with expert critique. A power walker whose speed she felt was excessive and said so. 2 pigeons she described as looking suspicious. A dog appeared within minutes. Large, golden, patient. Whose owner, a man in his 60s with a coffee cup and the relaxed demeanor of someone with nowhere to be, allowed the introduction. Hana crouched and greeted the dog with the solemn formality of someone conducting an important diplomatic meeting. Zara crouched beside her to prevent the very real possibility of Hana pitching forward in her enthusiasm. Junwoo stood just behind them. He looked at the back of Zara's neck. She had her natural hair pinned up because of the warmth, and the nape of her neck was fully exposed. At the base of her hairline on the right side, there was a small mark, irregular in shape, slightly different from the surrounding deep brown of her skin. A birthmark, the kind a person carried from the beginning without ever thinking about. He looked at it for 2 full seconds. Then he looked away. Then he looked back. Something moved through him that had no name. It was not a thought. It was more like standing in a dark room and feeling the temperature change without being able to see the source, certain only that something in the air around him was different than it had been 30 seconds ago. Hana stood up and grabbed both their hands at the exact same moment, her right hand finding Zara's left, her left hand finding her father's, and she pulled them forward toward the fountain she had been announcing since they entered the park. When Junwoo walked because his daughter was pulling him, they stopped side by side at the fountain's edge. Close, the way you ended up close when a child released 2 hands simultaneously, and the natural physics of the moment brought people together in the space she left. The water ahead, the mild air, Hana running the last few meters. He looked at Zara's profile. She was watching Hana with her arms loosely crossed, her head tilted slightly. The corner of her mouth was curved at whatever Hana was doing at the edge of the fountain. The pendant caught the light when she breathed. He looked at the pendant, then at her profile, then at the pendant. "Appa, do you have a coin?" Hana called. He reached into his pocket without looking away from the pendant for 1 moment longer. Then he walked forward and placed the coin in his daughter's outstretched hand. That evening, after Sungmin had taken Zara home, Junwoo sat in his study and called the jeweler. The man remembered him. Of course he did. Private commissions at that level didn't come often, and they didn't come forgettably. "The crescent piece," Junwoo said, "with the engraving on the back. Describe the specifications to me." The jeweler described them. The exact angle of the crescent, the weight distribution, the way the chain connected at the upper point. Unusual, and specifically Junwoo's request. The engraving, 2 letters intertwined, cut by hand. "Was there only one made?" Junwoo asked. "Only one?" The jeweler sounded genuinely surprised. "You were very specific about that. You said you wanted it to be the only one in existence." Junwoo thanked him and ended the call. He sat in the quiet of his study for a long time. The necklace Zara wore every day, the one she had told him she found at an outdoor market in Cape Town, had a crescent at the exact angle he had sketched himself 11 years ago. Haas connected at the upper point, the only one of its kind in the world. He picked up his phone and called Director O, And in the weeks that followed, the files that came back from Director O would rewrite everything Junwoo thought he knew about 11 years of his own life. The files arrived on a Monday morning before anyone else was in the apartment. Junwoo read them alone at his desk. The accident report first, the real one, 3 pages, compared to the single-page official version, and the 2 missing pages contained a witness statement from a driver who had seen a second vehicle deliberately accelerate into the first car on a stretch of coastal road outside Busan, with no cameras and no barriers between the road and the drop to the water below. The witness statement had been collected and then removed from the official record. The officer whose signature appeared on the original had retired 4 months after the incident on a pension significantly larger than his rank should have produced. He read the Cape Town file, a private clinic in the southern suburbs, a patient admitted unconscious, 12 days after the accident date, no identification, transport and care arranged by a third party whose name appeared once in the intake paperwork, a name he didn't recognize but whose payment method, when traced by Director O's investigator, connected back through 2 offshore accounts to a financial channel that he recognized immediately. One his mother had used for private arrangements for decades. The surgical records documented 3 procedures over 13 months. The post-operative photographs showed a face that shared no visible features with the pre-operative photographs. The reconstruction was complete, thorough, and undone by someone who had been paid generously to ask no questions. He turned to the last page, a single folded sheet clipped to the back of the surgical file, as though whoever assembled the package had debated including it and decided at the last moment that they had to. The obstetric notes. The patient had been 14 weeks pregnant at the time of the accident. He set the page down. He picked it up. 14 weeks. The pregnancy had not been visible. He had not known. Yes, she had not yet told him. The attending physician's note stated that the patient had been stabilized and the pregnancy monitored throughout the recovery period. The delivery had taken place 7 months after admission. Full term, healthy, a girl, 3.1 kilograms. The line below the delivery notes read, "Infant transferred to private transport arranged by third party on day 3 postpartum. Patient was under sedation for post-surgical procedure at time of transfer. Patient was not consulted." Yet he read that line 3 times. Patient was not consulted. His mother, or someone acting directly for his mother, had been in Cape Town, had been monitoring, had waited until the patient delivered, and then waited until she was sedated from surgery, and had sent someone into that clinic and taken the baby, and brought the baby to Seoul. And 3 weeks later, Sung Min had knocked on his study door and told him there was a woman in the lobby. "A representative," she said. "I from a private intermediary." She had something that belonged to him. He had gone downstairs. There had been an infant carrier on the lobby table. His mother had called him that evening. She had said in the composed and measured tone she used for everything that she had arranged for the child to be brought home. That Neri was gone. That the child was his and Seoul was where she belonged. That she had done what needed to be done because he had been in no state to do it himself. He had believed her. He had picked up his daughter and believed every word because he was grieving, and the baby was real and warm and present, and the grief needed somewhere to go. He sat at his desk now and looked at the delivery note. Patient was not consulted. Nari, the woman he had called Nari, a name she had let him use, a name that had been hers, had woken up from surgery in that Cape Town clinic, and her daughter was already gone. She had survived a murder attempt. She had delivered a baby alone in a foreign clinic with no identity and no documentation and no one she knew in the room. And then she had woken up, and Hana wasn't there either. He closed the file. He placed both hands flat on the desk. He looked at the wall and breathed very carefully for a long time. He let the morning run normally. Hana at the elevator. Breakfast. A negotiation about whether orange juice counted as a vegetable that had been ongoing since Friday and showed no signs of reaching resolution. At 11 o'clock, when Hana was settled with her program, Junwoo came out of his study and stood in the kitchen doorway. Zara was at the counter preparing Hana's lunch. She heard him. She kept working. "Hana," he said, "go watch your program for 20 minutes. Hana looked between the 2 adults with the brief, an accurate assessment of a child reading the temperature of a room. Then she slid off her stool and went down the hall without argument. Junwoo came into the kitchen. Zara continued preparing the lunch. She picked up the knife and began cutting the fruit. "Put it down," he said. She set the knife on the cutting board. She turned and faced him. He was standing closer than the usual kitchen distance. His arms were at his sides. His face was composed. His eyes had the quality she had been watching develop for weeks. Not professional distance, but the deep, particular attention of a man who had stopped managing what he let himself see. "Tell me about the coastal road outside Busan," he said. 9 years ago, October. The kitchen was very quiet. Zara looked at him. He looked at her. In the living room, Hana's program played at its cheerful, unstoppable volume. Somewhere outside, a delivery truck beeped twice as it reversed. "Iwei Junwoo," she said. His name in her mouth landed in him below thought. She watched it happen, the fractional shift in his face, the recognition in his eyes of something he could not have explained, but could not deny. "How long?" he said. "How long have you been in this apartment knowing who I am?" 8 months, she said. "You came back to Seoul before that?" "Yes." "For Hana?" "Yes." Her hand pressed flat on the counter. "I came back for Hana. I found the agency. I arranged the interview." "You arranged it deliberately?" "Yes." He held her gaze. "My mother," he said. She looked at him for a long time. She had waited 8 months for this moment. She had rehearsed it across 8 months of mornings in this kitchen, and none of the rehearsals had felt like standing in the actual room with the actual light coming through the actual window and Hana's program playing down the hall. "Yes," she said. He turned away from her. He faced the kitchen window with both hands flat on the counter and stood there with his back to her, and the city spread out below. His shoulders were rigid under his jacket, the only place the tension showed, because everywhere else he had absolute control of it. She told him everything. The car that came from behind on the wet coastal road, not drifting, not losing control, accelerating deliberately into the driver's side on a stretch with no barriers and a long drop to the water. The impact, sort of the barrier giving way. The fall, the water coming in through the broken window, very cold, very fast, and then darkness that lasted a long time. She told him about waking up in Cape Town with her hands and face wrapped in bandages, one hand still closed around a chain. She must have held it through everything. Through the water and the dark and the transport she didn't remember. A nurse she had never seen before sitting beside the bed. And the nurse told her she had been in a medically induced sleep for 8 days. She was in South Africa. Her care had been arranged and paid for by a private party whose name the nurse did not have. She told him about the 3 surgeries. The surgeon who had been honest with her after the second procedure. When the reconstruction was complete, no one who had known her face before would recognize it. She had lain in the recovery room and stared at the ceiling and understood what that meant. Whoever arranged the accident had planned it to be final. The fact that she was alive was not part of their plan. The new face was her only advantage, the one thing they had not anticipated. She told him about building a new identity, documentation and work history and references constructed piece by piece with the help of 2 people who had owed her a favor from before. People who asked no questions and expected nothing in return except that she stay safe and stay disappeared. She told him about coming back to Seoul. 3 years of watching from a distance first. Learning the shape of Hana's life, the park on Saturdays, the school she attended, the specific way she announced things as though filing official reports. Finding the agency, walking into the interview. Seeing Hana for the first time since she was 3 months old, and not being permitted to show a single thing on her face that was not professional warmth and competence. She told him that she had not known. Walking into this apartment for the first time, whether the grief Sung-min had once mentioned, briefly in passing, was real or performed. She had needed to watch. She had needed 8 months of watching him with his daughter, with his people, in the quiet of those evening conversations, before she was certain. When she finished, she was still standing at the counter with her hand flat on the surface and her eyes on his back. He did not speak. The tension across his shoulders had not eased. The Han River moved in the far distance through the kitchen window, indifferent, the way it always moved. "She told me you were dead," he said. His voice was completely level. The levelness was more controlled than anything loud would have been. "She stood in front of me and told me you were dead, and she watched me grieve you." "I know," Zara said. Her voice, the voice she had built, lower than the one she'd been born with, shaped by years of deliberate reconstruction, held steady. I know she did. He turned around. He looked at her across the kitchen with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not the controlled public face, not the soft, unguarded face he wore only for Hannah. Something completely stripped of management, something that had been underneath everything else for 9 years and had just come to the surface because there was no longer any reason to hold it down. Why didn't you tell me sooner, he said, when you came back? Ken, when you found her. Because I didn't know if you knew, she said, and I couldn't afford to be wrong. He held her gaze. He breathed. He looked at her face, really looked, the way he had been careful not to look across 8 months of close proximity, as though full attention was something he had been rationing because he didn't trust what it would show him. Go be with Hannah, he said. His voice was measured. The voice of a man who needs to be alone with something enormous before he can handle it safely in front of another person. She went. He drove to his mother's house alone that afternoon. He did not call ahead. He arrived and walked through the front door without ringing and found her in the formal receiving room. The room with the high-backed chairs and the specific lighting she had always used for conversations she intended to control. She was sitting with tea and a document she set aside when he came in, composed and unsurprised, the expression of a woman who had been expecting this visit and had prepared for it. He placed the folder from Director O on the table between them. Read it, he said. She opened it. She read slowly. The accident report, the hospital file, the obstetric notes, the delivery record with its single line at the bottom. Patient was not consulted. She read that line and did not react. And closed the folder and placed her hands in her lap. Everything I did, she said, I did for this family. He looked at her across the table. You tried to kill her, he said. His voice had not changed, had not risen, had not sharpened. The same even tone for every sentence, and that precision was more final than anything loud would have been. You paid someone to run her off a coastal road in the rain with no barriers on the ocean side. You arranged for her to be transported unconscious to another country and rebuilt surgically so that if she survived, which you did not plan for, she would have no way back to the life she had. You watched her deliver your granddaughter alone in a foreign clinic. You waited until she was sedated, and you sent someone to take the baby. You brought the baby to Seoul and put her in my arms and stood in front of me and told me her mother was dead. His mother said nothing. She spent 3 years watching from a distance. She arranged a job interview. She walked into my apartment and saw her daughter for the first time in 4 years, and she was not allowed to show a single thing on her face because she did not yet know whether I was part of what you had done. He stopped. Hannah reached for her hand on the first day. Did you know that? Yet your granddaughter found her mother by instinct in a room full of strangers because some part of a 4-year-old child knew what your arrangements could not erase? His mother's composure held. It had always held. She was not suitable, Madame Seo said. Everything I did was calculated to protect what this family has built. You would have thrown all of it. I am going to stop you there, he said. His voice did not change. It did not need to. He opened the second folder, where the criminal submission had been filed that morning by an independent firm. Attempted murder. Criminal conspiracy. The documentation was complete. The obstetric notes, the delivery transfer record, the payment trail connecting her financial channel to the clinic transport, the witness statement that had been removed from the official accident report. He removed her from every position she held in the family's business operations, every account, every board seat, every operational element. And the Hanum property would be monitored, a security detail placed that day, not for her protection, to enforce the conditions. When he finished laying out the terms, she looked at the folders and, for the first time, something moved at the edges of her composure. Not remorse, the specific expression of a woman who has just understood the full dimensions of what is being taken from her. You're taking everything, she said. She woke up in a clinic in Cape Town, he said, one with no face and no name and no baby and no way home. You took everything from her first. He stood. He straightened his jacket. He picked up both folders. I will not be coming here again, he said. Hannah will not be coming here. When she is old enough to decide for herself whether she wants a relationship with you, She will make that decision with the full knowledge of what you did. I will not influence it either way. But she will know. He looked at his mother one final time across the formal room. I spent 9 years grieving a woman who was alive, and he said. Hannah spent 4 years without her mother because you decided your preferences mattered more than her life. There is no version of what you did that this family recovers from. There is only what comes after it. He left. Sungmin drove him back across the river. The afternoon light was long and low over the Han. Sungmin said nothing. He had known Junwoo for 11 years, and he drove. The rain came 3 days later. It arrived in the early evening without warning, a heavy, committed autumn rain that drove against the 14th floor windows in continuous gray sheets and turned the streets below into shallow rivers. Zara had stayed late because Hana had woken from her afternoon nap with a fever, and they had spent the hours since managing it together. And by the time the child's temperature had eased and her breathing had deepened into genuine sleep, it was past 8 and the rain had not slowed. Junwoo appeared in the doorway of Hana's room. He looked at his daughter, then at Zara, sitting in the small chair beside the bed with her hand resting near Hana on the blanket. Then at the window. Sungmin can't get through, he said quietly. The underpass near your building is flooded. The buses through Mapo are suspended. Zara looked at the window. The rain was a solid moving wall against the glass. Stay, he said. Guest room. She looked at him. In the dim light of Hana's room, with the rain coming down and the child sleeping between them and everything that had been said in the kitchen 3 days ago, still sitting in the air of the apartment like a changed temperature. The word stay landed differently than it would have 4 months ago. She nodded. She checked Hana one more time. Cool enough, breathing evenly, the stuffed bear tucked under her arm, and went to the kitchen and put the kettle on because she needed something to do with her hands. Junwoo came in 10 minutes later. He sat at the counter. She made 2 cups of tea and placed one in front of him and sat on the other side. They held their cups. The rain drove against the windows. The apartment was warm and entirely quiet except for the rain. I went to my mother, he said. She looked up. I put the files in front of her. The accident report, the payment trail. He held his cup. She said everything she did was done for this family. He set the cup down. She has lost everything she actually cared about. Her position, her authority, her access to 40 years of what she built. She is under house restriction. If she violates the conditions, the criminal filing moves forward. Is that enough? Zara asked. He looked at her for a moment. For you, or for me? She held his gaze. Both. He was quiet. No, he said honestly. It's not enough. But it's what the law will sustain and what I can make permanent. A prison sentence she could contest and reduce. This, he looked at his hands, this she cannot come back from. Ever. The rain pressed harder. He stood from his stool. He came around the counter. She did not move back. He stopped in front of her, closer than he had stood to her in 8 months of shared space. Close enough that she could see the specific quality of his attention, which had no management in it. No professional architecture. Just him. Just this room. Just right now. His hand came up slowly. He touched the pendant at her throat. 2 fingers, gentle, lifting it slightly from her collarbone and turning it over. He read the back of it. His thumb moved across the engraving once. He looked up at her face. I made this, he said, 11 years ago. I took a sketch to a jeweler in Insadong, and I watched him cut these letters into the gold by hand. He held her gaze. I gave it to a woman I was going to marry. Zara's breath was very steady. She was making it very steady. The jeweler confirmed for me 2 weeks ago that only one was ever made, Junwoo said. It could only have come from one place. He did not release the pendant. I need you to tell me the truth. Not the market in Cape Town. The truth. She looked at him for a long time. One Nari, she said, her real name. The name she had not said aloud in 9 years. The name that lived in a box she had sealed so carefully that she had almost forgotten the sound of it in her own mouth. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, she was still right there in front of him. And the pendant was still in his fingers. And the rain was still coming down. And Hana was asleep down the hallway. And 9 years were sitting in the kitchen with both of them, or taking up the space between the counter and the window. I have been falling in love with you, he said. His voice was low and completely even. For months, while believing I was somehow betraying someone I had lost. He looked at her, and then I understood that they were the same person, that there was never any betrayal, that it was always you. She looked at his face, at the scar on his wrist she had noticed on the third evening and never asked about, at the particular quality of his eyes when he stopped managing what they showed, at the man she had watched for 8 months from a careful distance and had been falling toward for longer than 8 months, longer than 9 years, falling toward him since before the accident, enduring it and after it, and across every mile and every surgery and every document she had assembled in order to become someone else. Junwoo, she said. He leaned forward. His forehead came to rest against hers. They stayed like that. His forehead against hers and the pendant between them and the rain coming down outside and everything else suspended in the warm, quiet kitchen. Can I? He said. Yes, she said, before he needed to finish. He kissed her slowly, the way a person moves towards something they have been afraid to want and have stopped being afraid of. His hands came up to her face, careful, so careful, cupping her face as though she was something that had survived a great deal and deserved to be handled with the full knowledge of that. She put both hands against his chest and felt his heartbeat under her palms. Steady, controlled, almost. She leaned into him. He held her. The rain drove against the 14th floor windows, and the city below was all water and distant light, and the kitchen was warm, and the kiss lasted as long as it needed to, which was a long time. He proposed on a Sunday evening, 3 months later. Hana was asleep. The apartment was quiet in its particular Sunday night way. Zara was at the low table near the window with a book open and the lamp making a warm circle of light, and the necklace at her throat where it always was. Junwoo came out of his study. He sat across from her. He placed a small box on the table between them and folded his hands. She looked at the box. She looked at his face. I had a ring made once, he said. I lost it when I lost you. I had another one made 6 weeks ago. He looked at her directly. I will not reconstruct the speech I had prepared 11 years ago. I'm not the same person who prepared it. You are not the same person it was prepared for. But I am the same person who chose you then, and I am choosing you now, with full knowledge of everything that choosing you has cost and everything it will cost. When the complete absence of any interest in choosing differently. She opened the box. The ring was simple and exact. On the inner band, the same engraving as the pendant. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked up at him. Yes, she said. Obviously, yes. He took the ring from the box and placed it on her hand. She looked down at it on her finger. He looked at her looking at it. From down the hallway. Appa, I need water. Junwoo looked at Zara. She pressed her lips together. He stood and walked down the hallway to his daughter's room. And Zara sat at the low table with the ring on her finger and listened to the sound of him getting Hana water, and the quiet murmur of Hana's voice and his voice, and then the quiet again. She held the pendant. She had carried it through everything. 3 surgeries, 2 names, 1,000 ordinary mornings she had assembled into a life she could live in, waiting for the moment she could build the life she actually wanted. She looked at the ring. She understood now what the necklace had been carrying her toward the whole time. They were married on a Saturday in early spring, a private garden outside the city. 40 people who knew the real story, not the public version, but the complete one, with all of its damage and its distance and the stubborn, improbable insistence of 2 people on finding their way back to the same place. Hana wore a white dress with a yellow sash and was responsible for the flower petals, or a responsibility she took with the seriousness of someone who had been waiting her whole life to perform exactly this function. She distributed them along the garden path with careful precision, pausing twice to redistribute where she felt the coverage was inadequate. Nari came down the path in the spring light with the necklace at her throat. Junwoo stood at the end of the path with his hands at his sides and his face completely, entirely unmanaged. No professional distance, or no controlled expression, none of the careful architecture that ran his face in every other context. Just the face of a man watching a woman walk toward him who had survived everything the world had put between them and had come back. She reached him. She looked up at him. Junwoo, she said, quiet, just for him. Nari, he said, just for her. Her name and his voice, he given back to her with everything it had ever contained. Everything it had been before the accident and after it, and across 9 years of carrying itself in secret. The officiant spoke. Hana, standing nearby with her empty basket, began a whispered and apparently urgent negotiation with the small daughter of one of the guests about the relative merits of their respective dresses. Junwoo heard it. He kept his face composed by considerable effort. Nari fixed her gaze on the middle distance with the focused expression of a woman who has made a decision and is committed to it. They said their words to each other. Every word was true. 18 months after the wedding, Hana sat cross-legged on the living room floor and studied the face of her new sibling, with the careful attention of a senior researcher encountering new data. The baby was 12 days old. Yet he had dark hair and the permanent expression of someone who found his current circumstances mildly beneath his expectations. He was in the padded seat on the coffee table, and Hana was 8 inches from his face, examining him. He doesn't do very much, she said. He will, Nari said from the sofa. She was sitting with her feet tucked under her in her tea on the armrest, watching her daughter examine her son with the expression of a woman who is exactly where she is supposed to be in the world. When? Hana asked. Few months, Junwoo said from the armchair. He was watching both his children and his wife. The expression on his face was the one that only this room produced in him. No management, no architecture, nothing held back. Every year of what had been survived to get here was visible in it, and every day of what they had built since, and the complete, settled absolute knowledge of a man who knows exactly what he has and what it cost, and does not look away from either of those truths. Nari looked at him from the sofa. He looked back at her. I've been thinking about his name, Hana announced. We gave him a name, Junwoo said. I have a better idea. What is it? Nari asked. Hana considered this carefully. I'll tell you tomorrow, she said, when I've finished thinking. Junwoo looked at Nari. Nari looked at Junwoo. They said nothing. Sorry, because they had been parents long enough to know the terrain of this particular conversation and where it led if you engage with it at 7:30 in the evening. Later, after Hana was asleep and the baby was sleeping and the apartment had settled into its night quiet, Nari started laughing, sitting on the sofa with her tea, laughing quietly first and then fully, her head tilting back. Junwoo sat beside her and watched her laugh, and his face did the thing it did in this room, the complete and unguarded thing. Then he pulled her close. She leaned into him with her shoulder against his chest and her laughter quieting into something warm and steady. He rested his cheek against the top of her head, and they sat like that, while Seoul moved outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, lit up in the dark, the Han River visible in the distance where it had always been. The necklace was on the nightstand in the next room. 2 letters, 11 years, 3 surgeries, 2 names. One child who had reached for both their hands at the same moment at a fountain in a park on a mild autumn morning and pulled them forward toward the water. Not knowing, the way children didn't need to know, only sensing, only reaching. It had always been pointing here. Every single inch of it had always been pointing exactly here. And here finally is where they stayed.